and thank you so much for coming today in spite of the threat of snow and bad weather. So certainly appreciate your presence here. So we are going to talk about a different kind of threat today, and that's the cyber threat. It's not cybersecurity threats. So it's so I've been in this business for a while now, and I think we're at a very interesting point. And certainly, cybersecurity is at the forefront of everyone's mind, I think for three main reasons, right? So the first one is our businesses are getting increasingly digitized. And we're reaching a point where we cannot run a business without computers. And furthermore, those businesses have to be connected to your partners or the internet. Right? So you just can't compete without doing that. The second interesting thing is that the threat actors out there, every year, they are becoming increasingly more sophisticated, increasingly more motivated, and they have increasingly sophisticated tools at their disposal to do what they need to do. And then the third factor here is the regulations, right? So increasingly, we are seeing more and more regulations that an organization faces, and as we advise our clients, we are finding that they have to kind of comply with early was 1, now it's 2, and it's 3 regulations, right? So due to those 3 reasons, increased regulations, increased digitization, and the sophistication of threat actors is becoming a pretty interesting area to be in. So I think I have 1 hour to go through this presentation. As I'm going through it, I encourage you to make comments, ask questions, etc. I want to keep it somewhat interactive. So a lot of the material here, first we're going to talk about, actually let's get into the agenda a little bit. We're going to talk about kind of what's happening out there right now, in the kind of cybersecurity arena. Then we're going to focus a little bit on the regulations, and then we're going to get to how an attack has been put, like how an attack is put together, right? So and then once we do that, I'm going to actually walk you through a few different attacks that we have seen. So a lot of this material here is kind of coming from my own personal experience. And for those attacks, I will walk you through the different steps that the attacker went through and what they did in the end, with the intent of saying, okay, if you know what they do and how they approach you and try to attack you, then maybe you can find a way to prevent it or detect it. Right? And then finally, as controllers and as CFOs in the room here, you also have a vital role that you can play to keep your organization safe, to keep your clients safe, to keep your business partners safe. So once again, based on some of the experiences that I've had, I want to kind of give you some areas that I've seen where people in your shoes can help overall in cybersecurity. So with that, as I said, if you have any questions or comments, just feel free to jump in. We kind of step right to it. So. So these are some of the newsworthy breaches in 2017, right? And so I am sure you've all, some of them have personally had experiences with some of these. Your bank account is compromised, your email account gets hacked, and you get a notification to that effect, right? So some of the big ones, you kind of saw that so when we pull this list together, these are the important ones that are out in the public media, right? So while these are reported in the public media, you can rest assured that there are a number of other breaches that happened that never really made the news, right? So the big ones were, there was a consumer credit rating agency that got compromised last year, right? And 145 million consumers had their personal information exposed. There's a big web service provider, that had email accounts, and over 3 billion of those user accounts were hacked. Right? So it happened over time, but they finally came out last year and admitted that there were 3 billion accounts that were hacked. Right? Then there's a government agency that was attacked, and this is a government agency that had built some hacking tools and offensive cyber weapons, and they got released out and taken out by some of the bad guys. Then certainly ransomware. Last year was the year of ransomware, right? So there were a number of law enforcement organizations, small businesses, large businesses. In Europe, this was particularly bad. In London, where a number of computers were attacked. hard disks were encrypted, and then you had to pay a ransom to have your hard disk decrypted. And with our businesses, as I said, increasingly digitized, you lose your computers, you can't transact business. Okay? And there were some large U.S. businesses, for example, that had to shut down for a few days, because they had ransomware that was running in their systems. And then there was also a global shipping company that had a breach, and they spent over $300 million to recover from that breach last year. So these are all, and I have my source list of that is all kind of public, public breaches. So kind of moving on, I want to kind of touch on the regulations a little bit. So a bit of a personal anecdote. When I was much younger and in school, I had an issue with homework. And so there were a couple of times where I didn't get my homework turned in on time. And then my mother decided that she was going to take over managing my homework. And then at one point, I remember going up to my mom and saying, "Mom, I'm spending as much time doing my homework as I'm demonstrating to you that I'm doing my homework." Right? So, as in my role, as I go talk to CIOs, CEOs, CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, they're increasingly struggling with this fact that not only do you have to run a good, a strong cybersecurity program, you have to increasingly demonstrate that they're doing it to a number of different regulators. And some of the, and I'm not once again in your organizations, your experience may differ, but some of the people I talk to right now, they have to demonstrate that they're running a good, comprehensive, solid cybersecurity program to more than one regulator, right? So these are the big ones that made the news, and some of these are older regulations, but they made the news for various reasons in 2017. So I guess you're all familiar with the New York Department of Financial Services, the NYDFS regulations that came out. Then somewhat, modeled somewhat similar to that were the what came out from the NAIC for insurance companies. Right? So there's a new set of regulations around that for protecting customer information. Then for European citizens, there's something called GDPR that came out, right? Which is about protecting their personal information, breach response in a certain timeline, knowing where their data is kept and all that, right? And then, so GLBA and then some of the OCC standards and the HIPAA standards have been around for a while, but they made news in 2017 because of compliance issues, right? So I think the kind of punchline here is that, increasingly, we are finding, certainly, the controllers officers and the chief legal officer, the chief compliance officer, they have to increasingly demonstrate compliance to a bunch of cybersecurity regulations that are happening in the marketplace. Okay, so let's move on to kind of some of the fun stuff. So what really happens when a bad guy is trying to compromise you? So there are a number of different frameworks that have been developed over the years to demonstrate what happens. And after having to, as I said, detect, prevent, and help organizations recover from these attacks over the last few years, I personally like what's called the kill chain. That's my personal favorite. It was developed by Lockheed Martin in 2011 or so, to be able to kind of systematically walk through what happens when you get attacked. The importance of this is if you know how an attacker is trying to get to you, there are certain things you can do to kind of prevent them at each stage. Okay? So so I'm first going to walk through the kill chain, right? And then I'm going to walk through a very famous breach that happened a few years back, a big retail backup breach, and then show kind of how that attacker followed the kill chain, right, as they're trying to get to their target. And then after that, I'm going to walk you through some of the breaches that we've had to deal with, as a consultant that we had to help our companies recover from. And in that case, we picked breaches that we thought, we didn't pick kind of the biggest breaches, but we picked the ones that we thought maybe you could identify most with, because these were these were issues where controllers and CFOs had to get directly involved with because of the type of attack that happened and what the threat actor was after. Okay. Okay. So in each one of these attacks, right, that we've seen, the very first step is what we call recon, right? It's reconnaissance. So this is where the attacker is trying to figure out kind of who you are, how do we get to you, what are the weaknesses that you have, and based on some of the attacks that I've seen, this can go pretty deep, right? So some of the attacks I've seen have been around. They look to identify who the system administrators are. Let's say they target bank XYZ, right? And they'll go to like Facebook, for example, and say, who is or LinkedIn, right? And say who is the system administrator for bank X, Y, and Z, right? And then try to compromise their credentials. They'll scan your network. If your company has an internet-facing portal, or if you're internet-facing at all, I guarantee you're getting scanned every day, right? Some of it is automatic because there are these automatic scans that are running, constantly looking for vulnerabilities. Some of them are targeted, where someone wants to try to break in, and they're going to start scanning you, look to see, what vulnerabilities you may have. And some of these are people, as I said, because, and we'll walk through an example in a little bit here. In your company, they may look to see who the CEO is, right? Look to see. I've seen cases where they look to see, who their spouses are, right? To see if they can compromise. They're all looking to see ways in which they can get it, right? I've seen cases where they've looked, where they have found, for one particular deal, where they found the entire deal team, right? Because they've done some research and they want to disrupt a particular deal, and they found a number of members in the deal team. So that's kind of the first step that these guys go through, right? Please.
How long do, if once the perpetrator decides that this is the company he's going to go after, normally how much time will they dedicate to the reconnaissance areas? Is it weeks, is it days? Or does it vary?
Yeah, so it varies. I've seen cases, where it all kind of depends on two different things. How badly do they want to compromise you, right? And how good are your defenses, right? So I've seen cases where once a breach has happened and you go back to see what happened, you understand that the particular threat actor has been trying to scan you, look at you for months, right? There are other cases where they randomly scan your network, they find vulnerability, and then they go, oh, I can compromise. Right? So, no worries. So then the next step. So here they are now. They've kind of figured out, okay, we can get into a network, or we know who the CEO is. They've done some reconnaissance, right? So at this point, they're starting to think, okay, now you're a worthy target. Right? How do we go after you? And that's when they figure out, how do you attack? How do you attack you? Right? What's the weapon of choice? This is somewhat similar to real warfare, but in this case, these guys, they have, over time, particularly the most sophisticated threat actors, have accumulated a number of different weapons to which they can come and attack you. Right? So this is the way that they're trying to figure out what do we do. And as I said, I'll walk you through a real example in a second. So they do that, and then they figure out, okay, how do I get that weapon over there? Am I going to use email? I'm going to use some sort of a compromised website. Am I going to use the USB stick? Right? Like how do I kind of get this thing over to my target? So that's the next thing that they go through. And so once they figure that out, then they see, then they actually get that particular weapon deployed. Right? So it's a piece of malware, whatever it is that they want to do. Now it's in your network. Right? So that's kind of the next step of getting it in there. And then they do a couple other things before they really go after you. The first one is once they're in there, right, and I'm saying this as well, they want to stay there. Right? So they look to see, how can I make sure, how can I, move laterally, how can I find ways to just make sure that I'm embedded in our network. And we've seen cases where there's been a compromise, right, and they think they've kind of cleared recovered from it, but they haven't really, because the attack has found ways to migrate other parts of the network. So they do all that, and now what the next stage? What about command and control, right? So this is where now they're in your network, they're kind of well established. Now they start talking back to the mothership, right? So and some of this is really hard to detect, because you look through your web proxy logs, for example, and it looks like legitimate traffic, right? It looks like someone browsing a website. But reality is, this is a piece of software that is communicating back out to the bad guys, right? And they are sending instructions to this piece of software on kind of what to do next. And they do that, and then they finally, accomplish what they set out to accomplish, right? So that might be, to steal some data, might be to destroy some data, might be to encrypt your hard drives and ask you for money. Whatever the motive is, they finally kind of accomplish it at that stage. Any thoughts or questions about this? Yes, please.
Along this continuum, where do the phishing emails fit into?
Yes,
And also, what can companies do once they're getting an inordinate amount of phishing emails? Is there some way they can report it to someone that's actually going to care and do something about it?
So I'm going to hold, if you don't mind, I'm going to hold that thought. I need to hold that thought right there, because the example I'm going to walk you through will actually have phishing in it. So you can kind of see how it all plays together, if you don't mind. And then I'll answer your question what you can do about it. If that's okay. Okay. So, I think I'm not going to tell who the retailer was, but I think you can all figure it out, right? So this is 2013, a big breach, where millions of credit and debit cards were stolen at Christmas time, right? So what did they do here? So when they were doing their recon, they decided that the best way for them to get in would be coming through third parties, right? So they looked at, who are the vendors, right, that this particular retailer works with, right? And who are kind of parts of the vendor network. And then once they did that, right, so then, the weaponization, right? So they chose, in this case, they chose a particular piece of malware, right? And kind of through that, and to your point, right here, they use phishing as a way to deliver that piece of malware. Right? So they send an email out, to the third party, right? Post link, person clicks on it, boom, right? You have a piece of malware that's now been deployed. Right? So then that piece of malware, what they did was that went and installed a memory scraper, right? So through that, they managed to find their way into the point of sale systems. Right? On those point of sale systems, they installed another piece of malware that could go scrape memory. So the idea is that you scan a credit card, right? It stays in memory for a little bit before it gets transmitted out. Right? So at that point, that's kind of how they looked at getting the credit card information. So they did that. Then they established a good foothold in the network, right? So they kind of traveled around the network, established themselves. And once they did all that, only then did they start going back to the mothership. And then establishing a communications channel, because at that point, the bad guys had a way of actually controlling this piece of software that could actually scrape memory, tap credit cards.
So were they doing that at the third party, or through the third party they got to retail?
So it's through. So they first compromise a third party, and then the network between the third party and the retailer wasn't properly air-gapped, right? So then from there they got to the retailer. Right? So I didn't personally work on this breach. Some of my colleagues did, but if I were to speculate, I would suspect that they had spent some time trying to attack kind of through the front door, and they couldn't. And then they said, let's do some research, or their third party is just coming the other way.
So Ron, to your point here, that phishing didn't take place at the retailer, it took place through the third party.
I wasn't referring to this breach, I was referring to the bombardment I get all the time of phishing emails.
Yeah. So the right answer would be to talk to your IT, talk to your CISO, right? Get it up to your CIO, because they should do something about it. Now, there are two defenses against phishing. The best defense I've seen is frankly user training, right? And then letting a user know, this is the type of an email that's a phishing email. Always look at the email address, right? Just because I get an email from my wife, kind of be suspicious. Look at the actual email address to see is it really her. And I'm giving this as an example because I had a case of a CEO of a certain company where they got an email from their wife, but it's a spoof email, right? And you need possibilities of that.
So in a case, and I've had this myself, and I'm sure others have, in a case of you get a false party purporting to be the IRS, what's happening now in that case? They actually, are they just sending out a blanket email to all taxpayers that they know of, or are they getting that taxpayer information from the IRS and then sending information where they'll say, contact the IRS, you owe them money? How does that?
Yeah, so I don't personally know how that's happening.
Okay.
Sorry, I haven't dealt with that. So, yes.
So just an observation, one of the things that happens often is you get an email from someone you know. And usually if the subject matter of that email is awkward or wrong or doesn't make any sense, usually you can check your email address and say, oh. But what we're saying nowadays is it could be purported to a longer term type of phishing expedition. And so you should check every email is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because it could say something about something relevant that you might want to know about, and you respond before you check the email from each of the folks that we continually communicate with, right?
Yeah.
That's one thing. And that's difficult. So the question is there software or is there protection that you could put in that would say if the name and the email address are not consistent with the last email you received from that person, right? Is there something that says, this may be a spam email and it should go to your spam folder, so you should look at it. But is that happening all the time or is that not happening?
So there are anti-spam filters, that will look at, and they have varying amounts of success, and it depends on how you've configured them and all that, right? But to your point on learning, right? Kind of learn. I think what I'm saying is, are there anti-spam software that will actually learn kind of who your network is, and then is outside of that kind of flagging. I haven't seen that yet in the marketplace. There may be, because a lot of research happening in this area. I'll sort of look into it and back to you on that.
So Google in your Gmail account is pretty good. Often I get spam that I go to and find out it's not really spam, so they're being kind of overprotective in some cases. But I do find things that get through, like I said, with awkward topical matter that makes you look at it. Just the other point to what Nick mentioned on the IRS thing, in all of these features, and my son's a little bit into the cyber tech stuff that he's looking at for protection companies, and he said that most of these companies are looking for the low-hanging fruit on a general basis. So they won't spend much time analyzing the data on a massive email phishing scam. They just wait, they send it to everybody, and they wait for the 100 or 50 people that will respond, and the other 900 that they didn't get an answer, they don't really care. They just keep doing things over and over again to catch somebody. Because the person that responds to that is the same person who doesn't update his email password, doesn't update his internal workings passwords, and that's what they're looking for. Because it takes them enough time to breach you that if you change your email password on a regular basis, the email password, whatever they have, our viewers, might not be the same by the time they try to break in.
So I've kind of seen both cases. I've seen cases where it's as it's more scattershot, right? Like send a bunch of email addresses out, send a bunch of emails out. So sometimes what happens is they may to your point, they may end up kind of compromising. I've seen this happen as well, where they'll compromise a particular site and get a bunch of email addresses, right? And then they'll use that set of email addresses, to send you an email. And we've seen this where, so you're generally, I'm personally like this as well. If it's an email coming to my personal email account, I'm far more suspicious of it than an email coming to my work email account, right? And so sometimes they'll go, attack a database, attack a source of data that has a bunch of databases. And then, to your point, they'll do scattershot. But we've also seen cases where, for certain kind of high net worth individuals, they've kind of tried to find ways to find who their candidate is, or find there are, and we are not even sure kind of how they get this information, but they can be pretty persistent. So it's both. To some degree, I think what you're seeing might be. I hope that it's not the IRS releasing your email address to them, but I think it's more around them going to find the email address from somewhere else and then trying to reach it. Okay. So, any other comments or questions on kind of this? If that, yeah. So, so let's have a little bit more fun. Let's get into some of the actual attacks that we've seen, right? And as I said, once we kind of picked the ones that we thought might be applicable to U.S. controllers and as CFOs, right? So the first one here. So this is interesting. I'm sure we all have this, right? You have systems, that they are in your network, right? They've been around for a while, and IT comes and says, "Hey, I want to decommission this system," but people don't want to pay money to decommission it, right? Or sometimes you don't know if someone is using it. So more often than not, I've seen these systems get compromised because they're not patched. They are misconfigured, right? They're running old operating systems, right? So they are kind of prime targets for attackers. So in this case, with this particular client, what happened was they had a public-facing web application that hadn't been used for a while, and no one was really using it, right? So what they did was they actually went in, they attacked the web app. It wasn't patched properly, right? So they broke into it, and then through that web application, they broke into the database, right? And then once they broke into the database, you can do whatever you want, right? At that point, you can pull anything that's in the database out. So what they did was they pulled a bunch of employee data out, right, and customer data out. So the impact was that our client had to actually kind of send notifications out to all their customers and all their employees, saying your personal information had been compromised, we are sorry, right? And then kind of coming back here, the question is how could they prevent it? So one is just making sure that your vulnerabilities are you have to stay on top of all the vulnerabilities that you have, right? And there are public data sources that will tell you, hey, this particular web server, this particular system has this particular vulnerability, right? And then staying on top of patching, which is not easy. It can be easier said than done, because if you're patching systems, you have to kind of bring something down, right, to patch it, and the business isn't always happy about it. And I've seen cases where we had to patch something and it was the end of the quarter, right? And as CFOs, I'm sure you'll deal with this, right? Also, people in the CFO organization, IT comes and says, we have to take your servers offline for a couple of days, or for a day, or for the weekend, and then you're like, we can't, we have to close the books. Right? So there are kind of situations that you have to kind of work through in this case. So the next one, so in this case, what happened was, so this is interesting, right? So this was a more for legacy application, right, that sat on your network. Yeah. And the next one is a cloud application, right, where they had deployed an application out in the cloud, and this had personally identifiable information, right, names, social security numbers, and whatnot. And what happened in that case was, this is kind of going back to some of the things we talked about an attacker, being somewhat determined, right? Because they actually found a particular user they wanted to go after, and then they compromise users' credentials. So with a lot of these, and I'm not going to kind of go too far into the details, right? But one of the examples that I've seen is, you get an email, right? And then the email says, here's, you need to log into this system to do X, Y, and Z with your taxes, for example, right? Or, with your, with something else, right? And you go to the website, and then it says, type in your username and your password. Right? Most of us tend to use the same username and same password over and over again, right? Across our corporate network, across our personal email addresses, across websites we go, because there are so many places where you need a username and password that you can't keep track of it. So that's a classic approach that they use to kind of steal a username and password. Right? So in this case, they found a user, right? They found the address of that particular user. They sent them an email, right? And then compromised. They got the user's credentials. And once they got these credentials, they connected to the AWS instance. And once they got there, they had pretty much unfettered access to that data store. And they pulled out a bunch of personally identifiable information. And then, so when we go in and we deal with the breach, at some point we kind of walk away, right? Once we identify what caused it, we find the technology response to it, we don't kind of go any further than that. But in this case, the client was going to deal with the potential lawsuit. Our client was going to deal with potential lawsuit from their client about information being compromised. So some things you can do about this is, while I'm a big believer in the cloud, I've been a cloud proponent for a long time, but I do it in a safe way. Right? And there are so many tools and methods and technologies available for you to protect your cloud instance. I would say use them. Another thing that I'm also a big fan of is multi-factor authentication. So it's a little annoying, when I have to get my email on my iPhone and it has to text me a number and I put that number in each time, right? But at the end of the day, you know that if someone has compromised my password, they can't get to my email, right? So to get my email, they have to both compromise my password and steal my phone. So it's a bit of a higher bar, if you may. And then the other one is, kind of restricting your public access and kind of narrowing your network footprint down to what you need to expose, right? Kind of reducing your attack surface. So this is here's a favorite of mine. So in this case, what happened was they compromised. So our client was using Office 365 for email. Right? So as you know, Office 365 is a cloud-based exchange platform. It's not the best explanation, but that's kind of how you think about it, right? So what they wanted to do was they wanted to steal some money. And what they did was, they got into the Office 365 system and they compromised one email account, right? And then through that, they managed to get access to vendor invoices, right? So the vendor invoice comes in, right? They get access to it, and then they change the wiring instructions for the money, right? So, let's say, I'm the vendor and I'm sending, Neil an email, right? And then what they do is, in that email they go in and they change the bank account number to which the money has been wired, right? And then Neil forwards it to whoever on, and then bang, before you know it, the money has left the door. So they were successful the first time. Right? Then somewhere along the way they got a little greedy, and they tried to go for 17 million, and that of course raised